First, I want to talk about technology, because the days that we are living in have completely changed our lives. How many here do not sleep too far from our phones, our smartphones every night? Probably not more than 3 or 4 feet, you know. So it's time to realize that technology is finally catching up to the photographic evidence. And that technology was in full display here 2 years ago when I proved beyond any reasonable doubt that Doorman is actually Lee Harvey Oswald, and that Billy Lovelady is the figure to his left. To your right, if you're looking at the Alt 6 photograph, visoring his eyes. We used forensic overlays, and our methods and methodology follow scientific protocol, which I describe in my book. So anybody who wants to replicate my findings and my work can readily either go on the internet or it's all in the book. Now, what we have done here is apply the same forensic overlays and imaging technology to demonstrate what really happened with the backyard photos. And quickly, the famous backyard images of Lee holding 2 weapons. Can you hear me? Yeah. And 2 leftist publications were used to paint Lee as a violent communist, lone malcontent capable of assassinating the President of the United States. Life magazine did their very best to disseminate one of these images by prominently publishing it on the cover of its February the 21st, 1964 issue, and this is the one that I'm talking about. Now, on first observation here that I want everybody to look at is, notice the broad shoulders on this individual. Okay, later on, when you look at the overlays, you're going to see that there's a great deal of difference. Okay. Now, these are the images classified by the Warren Commission as exhibits from left to right. Commission Exhibit 133A, which is here. Oops, sorry. Here. CE 133B and CE 133C. The first 2 were allegedly found in Ruth Payne's garage. These were shown to Lee on the evening of 11/23. That was the Saturday after the assassination. Curiously, Commission Exhibit 133C did not surface until 1976 among the possessions of former Marine and Dallas police officer, Officer Roscoe White. At that time, the HSCA took possession and later returned it to the White family. The latter part of this presentation will focus on the role Roscoe White might have had in the production of these composites. Now, on the evening of November 23rd, 1963, Lee was interrogated by Captain Will Fritz, FBI agent James Bookout, and Secret Service Inspector Agent Thomas Kelly about these images. I want to point out here, underlined, when the photographs were presented to Oswald, he sneered at them, saying that they were fake photographs. The rest of this document talks about what happened there. And down here, he said at the proper time he would show that the photographs were fakes. Now, from the very notes that you just saw of Secret Service Inspector Thomas Kelly, I would like to quote what Lee said the evening of November the 23rd, if I may. He said, at the proper time, he would show that the photographs were fakes. Shall we finish what Lee intended to do had he not been cut down in the basement of City Hall the next day? Why not? This is what I was supposed to present last year at Houston. And you're going to see it. That's why I thought it was very important to present that here today. Let's begin with some very basic observations. These were brought to my attention by Amy Joyce, JFK researcher Amy Joyce. Now, the figure in CE 133A is not wearing a ring on either ring finger. CE 133B is wearing a ring here, or the circle, on his right ring finger. We also note the figure is not wearing a watch, while in CE 133A previous, the wrist is blocked by the hand holding the rifle. 133C, which is the one found among Roscoe's possession, is wearing a ring on his left finger here, and a watch on his left wrist, both on the same side, here and here. Here are close-ups of those. And this is what Lee was wearing that day when he was arrested. As you can see clearly, his Marine ring here. This was a bracelet. This is not a watch. I understand that the watch he left at the house, at the Payne house. Now, I like to establish precedent, what other researchers have done in the past on this, and we're going to look at some of that work here now. And this was from John Barber's The Garrison Tapes, 1992, Stephen Jaffe. And let's see if we can get this going
Dallas
here.
Police Captain Wilfrit's own notes. He showed the famous backyard photograph to Oswald during the 12 hours of interrogation. And Oswald said it's a fake, and I could prove it, and I will prove it in time.
Shortly after Oswald's arrest, Dallas police found 2 backyard photographs showing Oswald proudly posed with 2 communist newspapers, a rifle, and a pistol. Stephen Jaffe, a photographic analyst and investigator for Jim Garrison, confirmed for Garrison what Oswald did not live to prove himself.
Whoever framed Oswald evidently used only one picture of his face and planted it on someone else's body. Then, to give the face on the right a different look, it seems they airbrushed some of the facial features and tilted the head slightly, and in doing so, they tilted the shadow under his nose. That it was one face is easily demonstrated. If you take the face on the right and superimpose it over the face on the left, the features line up. But when you slide the face back, you see that it had to be tilted. The second and more obvious proof is with the position of the bodies. The body on the right seems to be closer to the camera. If so, the head should be larger. However, you can see when you slide it over the face on the left, the faces are the same size. This means the bodies should be the same height. They are not.
News of Oswald.
When we consider the
This is
statements
the
of Robert
Jim
and
Mars.
Patricia Hester, who worked long hours at the National Photo Lab in Dallas the evening of the Kennedy assassination. They were processing film and photographs for the FBI and Secret Service. With me is Jim Mars, a news reporter in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex for nearly 2 decades, and has taught a course on the assassination at the University of Texas at Arlington since the mid-1970s. Jim, you've spoken with both the Hesters, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Unfortunately, they're both dead now. I first interviewed Robert Hester in the late 1970s. He told me he saw the backyard photos in the hands of the FBI the night of the assassination. He was quite insistent on this fact. Of course, that's the day before the photos officially were discovered. In later years, his wife, Pat, confirmed this story and told me and other Texas researchers that the FBI even had a color transparency of one of the photos, as well as a picture of Oswald's backyard, but with no one in the picture. They were very certain about all this. It's very strange.
Now, he's talking about a photograph where nobody was in the picture. This is that photograph right here, okay, on the Dallas Police Department. Now, let's move on to the technology. Photogrammetry suggests the same face was inserted, just like Jaffe said before, into all 3 photographs, with simple airbrushing used to slightly alter the mouth, head, and hairline. Again, photogrammetry is where we set the images side by side and we run lines across. Okay, when we line everything up, as you can see, the nose, the mouth, the chin, and everything lines up perfectly here. When we superimpose all 3 of them, this is the result. Again, all features line up perfectly, confirming Stephen Jaffe's findings. And here is an animated GIF that shows. Okay, what we do is we color code each one, and I want to point out here that the only difference is up here where they've airbrushed, so just to make it look slightly different. Now let's compare the chins. This is the backyard, okay, square chin down here, as you can see. This is the New Orleans Police Department mugshot, all right? And this is a perfectly frontal shot. And this is the Dallas Police Department mug shot. I want to point out here, you see these markings here. This is red. This is mercurochrome that back in those days they used to use, you know, for lacerations and that kind of thing over the nose, the bridge of the nose. That's why he had a slightly swollen nose. Also here, the brow where he got hit in the Texas Theater in the scuffle. And you can see a slightly puffed eyebrow, you know, and it's, you know, the eye opening is not exactly the same as the right. Just goes to show the type of treatment that Lee that Lee had to endure that day. Okay. And again, if we go back and we look at the chins here, the table is covering a little bit here, but Lee had a prominently clefted chin, pointed, unlike, you know, the square chin that we see in the backyard photos. This is not new, okay? This has already been talked about before and presented. Jack White, for example. In fact, some people have noticed an edit line right here. Okay, you've probably seen photos of that on the internet. Okay, so here's a side-by-side comparison, and it's pretty obvious that it's not the same chin. 133A, NOPD, DPD. All right. No, you went too high. It's okay. It's let's see. All right. Now, when we conduct overlay studies of the same NOPD photograph onto the figure in Commission Exhibit 133A, this is the result. And I think this is pretty dramatic here because once we get the interpupillary distance set, which is what the facial recognition, the overlays, forensic overlays is all about, we set the interpupillary distance. I cannot stress that term enough because once we get that down, then all the other features should line up. In this case, we have all of this space, okay, including the bulging neck. Lee did not have this type of bulging neck. He had a thin neck, all right? And it's pretty obvious here that it's not the same man, okay? Now, again, interpupillary distance reveals the fake. Notice how the cleft of the chin, now on the next slide, I'm going to show you an animated GIF, shows how, well, I mean this is the one right now that's running. As the cleft begins to appear, as the opacity of the gallery image increases over the probe, and those are the two terms that we're going to go over now. Okay, down here. Okay, focus on the chin. You'll see how it starts to get pointier as the opacity increases. All right, right here. Obviously, not the same chin. Okay, now Commission Exhibit 133C. It was, again, like I said, it was found among Roscoe's possessions in '76. The pose is not the same as that seen in Commission Exhibits 133A or B. However, it's the same pose seen in a reenactment photograph found in the Dallas Police Department Detective Bobby Brown's desk. This is Bobby Brown, and as you can see, the exact same pose. There's another photograph, which is also Bobby Brown, okay, at a different day, and a different date, obviously. Okay, so this is, you know, kind of strange why we've got him posing twice. In the same pose as Commission Exhibit 133C, the one found at Roscoe's. And then we have the ghost image found at the Dallas Police Department. So we're starting to see, you know, all these different images found at the DPD, which really complicate things, I think. Then we have Roscoe. Roscoe was like a chameleon. Look at all the different faces that Roscoe had. All these photographs are of Roscoe, believe it or not. And you've got this one, which is dated 11/3/1963, where he's almost bald, but this one later in life, obviously he's wearing some kind of a hairpiece, okay? And throughout his Marine days, and you know, you got this one, which is a very mysterious looking photo. And here where he's smiling. But in all of them, you can see the square chin. It's prevalent in all of them. Now, Roscoe was trained in photography, having been hired in that capacity by the Dallas Police Department on October the 7th, 1963, only weeks before the assassination. Roscoe took pride in his photographic skills and was in the habit of altering the faces of people in photographs. His relatives thought it curious that he went to the trouble of erasing the faces of all the people in his pictures. They wondered where he had learned to do that, but naturally he never offered any explanation. After 8 months, Roscoe was finally classified as a mechanic and remained in the Max motor pool and continued sending home doctored photographs he had taken and developed himself. This is from a document I found at the Harold Weisberg JFK Document Repository at Hood College, Maryland. Then we have the famous beach photograph. And this is a very important photograph because this is what we're going to use as one of the gallery photographs for our overlays that I'm going to show you now. And we will extract Roscoe. This is Roscoe right here. Again, you can see, you know, the broad shoulders, you know, the thick neck. So I think you know where I'm going here. When we put them side by side, okay, we even notice here that he's standing on his right hip, sort of like the same pose as Commission Exhibit 133A. You know, it's kind of similar here, okay? Kind of had the habit of doing that. Then we have Jack White, the great Jack White, and he published this, and he suspected, he had already suspected it was Roscoe when he discovered this unusual lump on his right wrist where the red arrows are pointing, which appeared to have been the result of a poorly set bone fracture in his wrist years ago. All right, now let's move on to the overlays. The one on our left is the probe or control. Okay, the one on the right is gallery. We will overlay the gallery onto the probe, and we'll do that 3 times here. Then we have Lee. This one is from the night of November the 22nd when they still allowed him to wear his rust-colored shirt. This is when they finally decided, hey, you know, we got a problem with the shirt, we better, you know, have him take it off. This is for the mugshot. All right, I have extracted Lee and removed all of the other extraneous information from the photograph, okay, to facilitate the overlay. I want to point something out here. This is not an exact frontal perspective. You can see more of the right ear than the left, so the camera seems to be slightly to his left, okay? But we can still obtain verifiable data here, you know, with setting interpupillary distance. Now, these are the results of the overlays with the Roscoe image. From top to bottom, left to right, we increase the opacity. 0, this is 25, and so on until we get to 100. As you can see, the neck, the shoulders, even the chest here under the armpit, okay, they all line up perfectly, all right, as we go from left to right, top to bottom. This is an 8-panel collage with increasing opacity values. Okay, these are side by side. This is 0, 50, and 100. And here we have an insert comparing the chins. Here is an animated GIF or GIF. As you can see, as the opacity increases, okay, this is full body. Then we're going to go, and even the shape of the head is a dead ringer. Then we have focusing more on the torso. All right. Now let's move on to Lee, the first gallery image. Here, as you can see, the shoulders are much narrower. Okay, the neck is not even close to being as thick. Shoulders are more raised. Okay, when we set the position of the chin, okay, and the mouth, everything else should line up. Okay, because we're working both in the horizontal and the vertical planes, and we can see that it's not the same man. Here's a animated GIF. Now, interpupillary distance. This is the Dallas Police Department mugshot, which I have extracted. Okay. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to focus completely on the head and the face. We've outlined in red, okay, the head to facilitate what we're trying to present here. And then we've color-coded the DPD mugshot. Now, what's really interesting in this case here, if you go back and forth here, where the NOPD overlap was on this side, now the overlap is on the other side, on the opposite. I found that very interesting. But still, you've got the problem of the neck, the size of the head, okay? Notice if I go back and forth, the eyes are in perfect position, and the nose and the mouth, they do not move. The reason they don't move is it is Lee's face. There is no doubt about that, okay? Now, if we go here, now what we do, we lay a grid, and when we lay a grid onto the image, we're able to extract data, empirical data, which is measurable, okay, in distance. That's what photogrammetry, biometrics are all about, where we can measure the distance here between the eyes, you know, going top to vertical and the horizontal plane, okay. Again, we've outlined the figure and we've extracted it from the photograph. And this one's pretty dramatic here because it's obvious that the features are Lee, but the body is not. Okay. And here's the animated GIF. When we look at these overlays, I've said it before, the key is to observe if there is movement or non-movement of the features. As the opacity increases in value, if you see no movement, it means you have a positive identification. If you see movement, then it is not the same person. In this case, at least in this area here, it is Lee. Now we'll do the same thing with Roscoe, okay? We use the same, exactly the same image, okay, because we want our data to remain consistent. Materials and methods are very important in scientific protocol. And this is what happens. The neck, the width of the neck lines up perfectly. Okay, the neck lines up perfectly. The slouch, you know, of the shoulders, the traps, the chest, everything, the shoulders, everything, right here, this area, okay? Obviously, one figure is wearing a shirt, the other is not, so you're gonna have this overlapping here. Oops, sorry. That was the last frame, but all right. This is the next to the last slide anyway. But I'll go back here and forth. Okay. You can see this. To me, it's a perfect match. And then we have the animation. And my conclusion is that Roscoe White is Backyard Man. Again, this is exactly the same methodology that we followed to identify the man in the doorway. These are accepted forensic overlay techniques. I have complete sources in my book, and the chapter on the man in the doorway identified. I present exactly how the methodology is done and the type of programs that you need to do it. And I have to say also, after we did the man in the doorway 2 years ago, I challenged anybody in the world to follow the same methodology and refute me. Refute me. Use the same methodology. That's the way it works in scientific protocol. And then you go and you write a paper and you say, hey, I followed your methods and I've got different results. So far, nobody has come forth. So if somebody comes here and says, I own the negative and it's Billy Lovelady, there's a problem with that. Because just because you own the negative, you're going to proclaim that it's Billy Lovelady? I don't think so. Okay? So that's it. I'll take some questions if...
14 minutes for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please come up here and use the microphone.
Sure. Claire.
Hi, Larry. Sorry, my voice is a bit funny today. I believe that may I add something and then ask a question?
Sure, of course.
Okay. I believe that everyone will be able to notice, if they can hear me, a slight change in the amount of contrast. Can you put it back to the one we
Which
were
one,
on?
Roscoe?
The one we were on at the end where you can actually see the full,
Here.
no, the one where you see the final picture, yeah. It should be coming up.
I don't know if it's going to come back. This might have crashed here.
There,
Yeah,
that one.
just use that one, yeah. Yeah.
No, I need the Life magazine.
That's way at the beginning. Yeah.
No, you had it just before you started flipping. Conclusion slide.
I'd have to go back and start. 'Cause you want to look at the
I can
Life?
state what I was going to
You wanna
state, but
look at
I'd
the
like
Life-
it up
You want to look
there.
at the Life magazine image, right?
No,
This?
the final slide you had, the very final, there we go. Can we
That's
get-
a gift. That's an animation.
Yeah, I know, but it wasn't animating at that specific point.
It's not. I'd have to rerun this whole thing.
Well, as it runs and it comes back,
It's not going. It's not going
Okay.
to. It's not going to.
you may
You'll have
even
to
be
run
able
the-
to, I need the next one, so if you can
I can't
just...
get it. I can't get it unless.
Can you show it small then? Sorry. Okay. You may be able to see it small here too. Can you see that the contrast is less over the face and up into the hair on our right? And it is a higher contrast left side of face and hair on his left. So you can actually see that the photos were overlaid. The head is wider at the left upper side in a darker contrast with the skin. There's more whitish skin and blackish hair. In that center to right area, it's a grayer picture has been put in there. And to his right, our left, it is now, any differences are hidden in the black. Can you see? That's what
There you
I
go.
wanted.
That's what
Can
you-
you see where Lee's head ends? Can you see that it is actually gray? There's his left forehead. Can you see that? Where his head ends and Roscoe's begins. Okay, that's one issue. Another issue is people may not understand that we're not only talking identifications, but exact same photos. That's a difference between identifying a person and having the original, actual, combined faked photos. The body, all he had to do was turn it black. Cut off a little bit of the left arm so that it's like it's going up. So that is actually not just an identification of Roscoe White, but that bathing suit photo has to be the body turned black. What you do is you overexpose the paper, and it makes it turn black, because that's exactly the same shoulder line and exactly the same body structure.
Yeah, it's what's
Okay, so
amazing,
these are
yeah.
actual photos that he used. The legs have been shifted a bit. Okay, so the legs in the black have been overexposed and shifted. And the arms have been added. And anytime you have a black or a white, and you're going to a textured gray and black, you can shift them up or down easily. You just don't expose that part of the paper. So what I'm saying here is that you can see where Lee's head ends and Roscoe's begins on your right, his left. You can see that it is exactly the same body except a cut off on the left arm.
The technique that we believe that used here is called matte inserts, and
Yes.
that's exactly the same technique that was used to create the autopsy, the back of JFK's head.
Yes.
Okay, and so this is technology that was available at the time.
It's easy. You
And
cut out something on a piece of cardboard. You expose what's in the middle or on the side where there is an opening. Then you make the opposite. You cut out the cardboard for the area that you didn't have, that you had open before. Now you're going to cover it, and whatever was covered now you expose.
Yeah, it appears that Roscoe was quite an expert, in the technique.
Yeah, it's
according
very
to the
awkward
information.
actually,
Yeah,
but there are
I'll-
black areas, and
Brooks.
that's where you do it in. You do it in the black or the white.
Okay, Brooks.
Yeah, Larry, I was wondering if it's just coincidental, I know John Armstrong's name is kind of verboten around here, but I looked at a lot of those images that he has in Marine Corps photos. Coincidentally, I did the same thing. If you take the midline and the pupils, and you start comparing these images, I
Start
blew
to
them
see a
up.
lot
I
of
used-
things.
I blew them up, I used a metric ruler.
Yes.
They're two different individuals.
Yeah, and what the advantage here, especially in Photoshop and some of these very sophisticated imaging programs, is where you can lay grids, like this, and you can actually draw empirical data, and like you say, you can start even measuring out, and that's why, like I said, the technology is catching up to the photographic evidence, and which is good, because now the perpetrators did not know that this eventually was going to happen. At the time, it's like they were talking about the Z film 2 days ago, that for that time, that was good, that was okay, that passed, but now it doesn't. So
The point I wanted to make is, I don't know what these fleshy nubs on your ears are, but if you measure in some of these Oswald photos, midline of the pupils to here and other anatomical features, these are Oswald photos, but they're two different Oswalds. I don't know if you've done that analysis.
yeah, we did that. The images that we used 2 years ago that are described in the book turned out to be Oswald. There are other images, for example, the ones that Judith has cited, the sepia. That's obviously not. You can do overlays on those and prove that that is not Lee. Okay, but yes, there are some photos that they just do not turn out to be Lee, especially when you go with interpupillary distance and measuring like that. That's it? Okay.
So that's the time if you got a last
Yes, sir.
question. Please use the microphone.
At what point do you think this was done? Before, after, how much before?
Very interesting. Yeah, I've always wondered, when did they take this photo of Lee? Okay, at what time? Obviously it was, practically 12 noon, and when did they take that photograph, which they later on used? Because, the circumstances, have always been pretty mysterious to me. That's a really good question.
Might have been in that yard.
Yeah. Well, Roscoe, Roscoe was Roscoe. He was intelligence, and the circumstances surrounding his life, are still very mysterious to this day. Yes, sir.
One thing that was mentioned in the earlier analysis of Jaffe, I believe, who worked for Garrison,
Yes, sir.
was the different height of the bodies if
Yes,
you
sir.
again line up the key elements of the face.
Yes.
Did you measure the two heights of the bodies in the two photographs, or compare that to?
No,
the
I
Oswald height?
concentrated. No, I concentrated on from the waist up.
Got it.
But yeah, I know what you mean, because I figured Jaffe it really there wasn't much to add to that. Okay, and what we needed to concentrate more on was identifying Roscoe as a backyard man.
In relation to Brooks and Armstrong's research, I mean, it's one thing for there to be imposters or impersonators or persons who have photographs or said to be Oswald that are not, versus there being two individuals who had parallel growth and both mothers named Marguerite and all this other stuff, which frankly is not only improbable, but from research that Judith and I did on specific aspects of John's work, not supportable. I've maintained for a very long time that in order to prove there were two Oswalds, you'd have to prove there were three. The CIA creates a phony dossier and history for their agents to use when they return to civilian life, so they don't have to account for the time they've spent working for the agency. I believe John mistook the false dossier the CIA had created for Lee Oswald, who after all defected to the Soviet Union at their bequest in order to set things up to sabotage the summit conference between Khrushchev and Eisenhower, and therefore had such a false dossier, but that John mistook it for the real life of another person, and that he's actually therefore never substantiated his claim that there were two Lee Oswalds, one he calls Harvey, one he calls Lee, that led parallel lives. I'd also add about Roscoe. He appears to have been a very nasty piece of work, and there are reasons to believe that he actually was responsible for taking out as many as 50 JFK witnesses. Roscoe White was a professional assassin, and his role in this was quite profound, and ultimately the whole story would be ghastly indeed.
And quite sophisticated,
Great.
quite a sophisticated one also, Jim, because let's not forget that he also worked at Jaggers Chell Stovall at the same time that Lee did, and he had access to the most sophisticated photo labs and equipment of the time. So this isn't something that's out of reach. Yes, sir.
Just a quick comment. I've been a still photographer and a darkroom technician for about 35 years.
Fantastic.
And the Oswald photograph of his face, that wasn't necessarily taken outside. In fact, I think it was probably taken inside.
Really?
Reason being, in portraiture, sometimes you use a light that's in front centered and about a 45-degree angle. It creates that shadow underneath the nose. In portraiture, that's called a butterfly shadow, because it roughly resembles the wings of a butterfly,
Yes.
a profile of a butterfly. So it's commonly referred to as butterfly lighting. Now, so that's what that
the
shadow.
light source would be right up above.
Exactly, about that angle. And that's quite often if you're taking like ID photos or something like that,
Passport.
you'd have a light to illuminate the face, which would be centered and then above. So it's consistent with
Yeah.
photo ID type lighting
Yes.
that creates a butterfly shadow that could have easily been taken inside. And perhaps, I know in the film JFK, it's mentioned that Lee Oswald worked at, I think it's Jaggers Child's
Stovall. I just
Stovall.
mentioned that. Yeah, Jaggers Chell Stovall.
Yeah, it could have been taken there. That's my theory.
Yeah. And I want to also point out in the movie JFK, when they're describing this procedure, they are actually cutting out the entire figure, and I don't think it was that complicated. Okay, it was just a matter of inserting, doing the matte insert over Roscoe's figure, and didn't have to really go into so much problems, to get the job done. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Mr. Larry Rivera.